Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How's everybody doing this morning? We're going to do a little better than that. How is everybody doing this morning? If you bring it, I will, I promise. The question before us today is, can AI power inclusivity? What do you say? Just a quick poll, yes or no? What do you think? Yes? No? Maybe? Dubious? Well, this panel, maybe? Okay. This panel today is going to help us think through that question. And so, in that we only have 40 minutes, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take about 90 seconds to introduce themselves before we get to some of these questions. Queenstar, you're first.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I know it's 8 a.m. on a Saturday, so thank you all so much for being here with us. I am Queenstar Akrong, and I will say for the past decade of my career, I have been at the intersection of digital media and increasing post-secondary access opportunities for students. And what that looks like is that I am the founder of No Debt Degree, which is an online advising platform that really helps students and families understand the financial and academic affordability lens for any education they want to do after high school. And then I'm a senior director at Whiteboard Advisors, where I support some of the largest and most influential education organizations on how to support underrepresented students, and spend a lot of my time talking to school district leaders across the country. So it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Great, thank you.
Arun Gupta, thank you again for coming out today. My background is I grew up in Washington, D.C. My father's been in public service for 45 years at the Navy, so public service has been in our background. My professional career was as a venture capitalist, investing in entrepreneurs and at the intersection of mission tech and entrepreneurship. After I retired, I started teaching at Georgetown, at Stanford, teaching a class called Valley Meets Mission around how do you take the entrepreneurial spirit of the Valley and tie it to mission-oriented problems for social good. Through that, wrote a book called Venture Meets Mission, which we released this year, and I'm now running a foundation where we have a nearly $500 million endowment called Noble Reach. And what we're trying to do is really inspire this next generation around public service, but also how do we connect our top innovation in the entrepreneurial ecosystem to solve big problems.
Domonique?
Nice. Good morning, everyone. My name is Domonique. I'm from Oakland, California. My background is a little jumpy. I went to Clark Atlanta University majoring in fashion design and left there thinking I was going to become an attorney from that for some odd reason, and then went on to work with different startups. I started working actually at Y Combinator as the director of events, the 30th employee there, and kind of scaled out what their events looked like to where they are now today. I left there and went to Allraise as director of engagement and helped build out that company as well. I'm a big fan of inclusivity with founders and funders. Left there and then was investing with Sam Altman for the past 3 years, and now I am VP of the AI initiative with Van Jones over at Dream Machine, so hoping to change the conversation around AI with my community.
Fantastic. I'm Cordell Carter with the Aspen Institute. I lead the project on belonging. Prior to that, I led the Socrates program. In fact, we use this very room. We'll be here next week for the next, the last 7.5 years. AI and the various use cases of AI has been a topic of discussion for the last 15 years of the Socrates program. We have literally had this conversation all over the world. I counted before I got here, over 100 different seminars over the last 15 years. And so Aspen's been on this issue, and I believe it's all about the use case, but I'm willing to be convinced that it's not, okay? So Dom, we're gonna start with you, okay?
Yeah.
Why should people be optimistic about AI?
I feel like because we have a choice. I feel like for a lot of different areas, I didn't have a choice. I was kind of given the rules around it and what's gonna happen and what not happen. And right now, I feel like we're in a space where it can be disrupted, and I have a choice to disrupt it. And I like that. Like, I like breaking all the rules and figuring out, like, my own path to go down. So I feel like we should be positive because we have an option to decide how it's going to look.
Do you think the users are deciding how it looks at present?
No.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. What do you think? Come on, tell me a little more.
No, I do not. I think that we have the opportunity to change it, but the people that are building most of the programs and platforms we're using, I don't think internally they have enough employees to say that look like me or that look like you or anyone on this panel to be building something that makes everyone feel included. So no, I don't.
That feels like a layup for Arun, because I'm going to ask you, how can we be more AI literate so that more users are driving the use cases versus the other way around?
Yeah, so Cordell, let me start with, I come at this with a natural bias towards optimism, right? When you're a venture capitalist, or in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you're around people that are optimistic. Entrepreneurs naturally are. When you're teaching on an academic campus, you're around, young students that are just starting their, life journey, and they're optimistic, right? If you're not optimistic at 22 on a college campus, you won't be later. And so I have a natural bias towards optimism here. Where I think the opportunity is really unleashing more experimentation around this, right? I think we're in a phase right now where what I would say is we're laying infrastructure, right? We're not at the use case stage yet. And the key here, and we saw this when we were looking at, the evolution of the internet, is that access is important. And I think to Dom's point, we're at a stage right now as we lay infrastructure that we need to make sure all communities have access to that infrastructure, right? And that, I think, is an important lesson that we learned through, Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, is to make sure we get that right as we now move into this phase with AI, is how do we make sure that everyone's getting access to this? Because what happens when you don't have access and you have large lag effects, right, is that those communities that come online 3 or 5 years later aren't only 3 or 5 years behind, they have 3 or 5, the other group has been testing and learning and is, a force multiplier ahead, right? And so that's where you magnify the gap. And so I think that's going to be the key here is how do we, and this is why I think some of the work that, Dom's group is doing is phenomenal, because it's about getting access early on. The other point on that, I'd say, Cordell, is it's really important, I think, to be optimistic with especially communities that don't have that access early on, so that they don't feel scared, right? Because if you start scaring folks around, here's all the negative stuff that's going to come at this new technology with you, and they don't really have access, they're not going to go seek it, right? And then they're not going to want to engage with it, even when they finally do get access to it. So I think the education piece and the narratives and the words we use around this, I think there's a lot more focus around negativity, and we just need to be a little bit more focused on what the upside and the opportunity is, and I know we'll talk more about that. One last point to just put that, in a bow is, I was chatting with a close friend that's at OpenAI, and she'd gone around and, done a tour around with 30 countries. And I asked her what her big takeaway was when talking about AI with world leaders. And her takeaway was that there was an inverse correlation between GDP and optimism. Right? And when you think about it, it makes sense. Like when you have a lot to lose, you're worried about all the negative things that could happen. So what, you go to the EU, you go, we're all talking about what are all the guardrails we need to put in place. You go to places that have a lot less to lose, you're like, well, tell me what I could do with this. How do I leapfrog? How do we bring more people into the mainstream? And I think that's a context that I think is influencing my optimism around what we can do here.
Great, thank you. Queenstar, I want you to pick up on a point that Arun just made about the communities that are left out. You have a background in social justice and community development. What are you seeing, and I guess what are your thoughts about preparing these communities that have been left out of various technological revolutions in our history with this new one we have before us?
No, absolutely. I think there is a fear factor, and I'm glad that you brought that up. A lot of people are unsure if I'm using this data, is it going to come back to haunt me one day, right? When there's a lot of sometimes tracking on our cell phones, and people are generally very nervous. In my work, so I was born in Ghana. I moved to the US when I was 9. So a lot of the communities that I work with are immigrant communities. And what you are also seeing is that sometimes people are undocumented as well. And so when they come into this country, whether legally or illegally, are thinking about how do I engage with the system in a meaningful way. So when I think about the digital divide and when I think about the community empowerment, I think AI can really propel and support communities as they are engaging with the US in a new way. And so that means AI probably supporting with government agencies as they're thinking about how to support newcomers, right, into this system. And so I tend to lean optimistic because I think naturally the communities that I work with, people are trying to find a way to live their own version of the American dream. And sometimes it's the lack of resources or even knowing where to go to find resources in order for you to be able to live a dignified life in the US. Also, what we're seeing and why I'm optimistic about AI is in school districts, right? I work at Whiteboard Advisors where we are always talking to superintendents and we're figuring out what is going on with our education system in the US. Right now, we had a stimulus package when the pandemic happened. $200 billion went into school districts around the country. And now with that funding having to be used by September 30th, 2024 this year, you have school districts that are dealing with budget cuts, they're dealing with having to fire teachers, paraprofessionals, and all of that. And so what comes to mind when I think about the power of AI, there's some districts that also have a whole new group of migrant populations coming in. And they have something called newcomer centers, right? And newcomer centers are for students or families who are new, whether they're refugees or they recently came into this country. And when I think about how AI can support school districts in already a dangerous time for them as they're thinking about money, AI can propel and make these communities feel more included in the school district system. So thinking about, for example, assessments, right? People are speaking different languages. AI can immediately make it easier for a school district leader to be able to communicate with a new family that's coming in. Another way is assessments, right? Trying to really figure out, what does this person actually need? Do we have the resources to support them? So as much as there's a fear factor and people feeling nervous about this, I think it actually eases the process of people engaging with our public agencies in a very specific way.
I'm glad you mentioned public agencies.
Yeah.
Arun just wrote a book about what the government can do in this place, and I do want you to speak about, especially about infrastructure. But we have some colleagues in the room from Aspen Columbia, some trustees. Aspen Columbia is one of the leading civil society organizations in Columbia, so they are having conversations about the future with government officials. So Arun, if you were speaking to them as their consultant on AI and making sure that was accessible to all the communities that feel left out, I would wonder what you would say to the government. Dom, if you could speak to the startups community, what do they need from the government to ensure that AI is filtering down to startup, ensuring that innovation is happening across the country, not just in the Valley? And if you could speak to school districts.
Yeah.
So hopefully that question was clear enough for you all.
Yeah, so look, for what we're doing at Noble Reach, we are looking to get our best tech talent into government right now. Think of a Teach for America-like program, and how do we inspire this next generation to go in? Our theory of change there is that, look, there's always a focus right now on policy when you think about government and what they need to be doing with AI, but the rubber hits the road with talent, right? You can't have policymakers that don't understand the technology regulating something without thinking that there won't be unintended effects. So I think job one, if I was talking to government, is like, how do you, ease and modernize the infrastructure to get students coming in, right? Recent grads, and we're at a point in time where you don't need 10 years of experience to come in. Like, the student coming out of the top schools right now are, as versant on this technology as anyone else is. So that would be job one, right? And right now there's a lot out there with the AI executive order about how do we get more AI talent in. But there's a lot of work to be done to make it easy to do that. I actually think there's a real opportunity right now to make this something where, this is the place you start your career. You got selected to come to government to do this, and then you do this for a couple of years, and then you go off and do whatever you may want to do. So I think that would be one thing I would say to government. The second is, I think there's always a tendency to think about, like, how do we regulate to constrain risk, right? I don't know if there's enough conversation there around how do we, one, ensure access, right? And then how do we create sandboxes where we encourage experimentation, right? And I think government can play an important role there, because it's not naturally going to find itself into these communities. And so I think it's really important that government start thinking about how do we, as we promote the technology, because I think that AI, when we look back on it, it's going to be like we think about any kind of infrastructure. It's going to be across all facets of life. You don't think about broadband as just being a telecom thing. Broadband enacts all facets of every sector that we have today. It's like electricity at the end of the day. And so I think how we create that experimentation is incredibly important in these communities, and putting rules of the game around that. Right? Here's how you can experiment, and here's how we're going to create safe sandboxes to enable folks to do that. And so that would be a place where I would be really trying to focus early on right now, as opposed to like, here's all the things you can't do, right? And I think that's an important message out there, is to start talking about that in a more positive way.
Yeah, I agree with a lot you're saying, and then I also feel like startups and VCs, we operate in tandem. So I feel like the boundary piece that the government is going to try to play a role in right now is encouraging, but also scary to me, because startups move really, really fast, and the government does not. So if I'm changing day to day, then how can I expect you to create a policy that's going to change on a daily basis? So someone from the startup side needs to be on that side internally, kind of helping with those guide rails. But I honestly don't really trust the government right now to create the guide rails that we need, because they don't know the plan that we have.
Yeah.
And no one's going to know that. I mean, I think that even with OpenAI, things are changing every day. There's going to be something new out every day. So I'm not sure how that will work, creating those boundaries.
Are you concerned at the fact that there really are no parameters right now?
Yes. I'm concerned, but I'm less concerned about the no parameters than too many parameters.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Quick example before you talk about its impact on education. I was in Indianapolis 3 days ago. I was talking to a person that works for the school district. He says there's 567 Haitian students in this school district, and there are 0 teachers that speak French Creole. So they're teaching every course with Google Translate.
Yeah.
Inefficient, but it's the best they can do. So I just wonder, like, are you concerned about things like that? Like, are they getting an adequate education, even with AI?
Yeah. I think, so what we're tracking and what we're seeing at my firm, Whiteboard, is the education system has a frenemy approach to AI right now. I think the friendliness is that AI definitely helps personalize students' learning a lot better, right? You have teachers who might have multiple students and don't understand what interventions those students need. And now if you have an AI tool in the classroom, you know, Tommy needs this intervention, Brianna needs this intervention. So it helps teachers have a little bit more control in how they're helping students. And I think education had this huge arc, right? In 2020, the pandemic happened. One day kids were rolling up with school in their backpacks. The next day they were on Zoom. Right? So education systems immediately had to figure out digital infrastructure. They had to figure out how to bring in more tech into their school districts. But what you're now seeing with the enemy component of AI is that they are unsure about student data privacy, right, being at risk, because school districts are always trying to figure out how to keep their student data. And then also, you can't turn on the news without hearing about a student writing an essay with AI and a teacher like being so mad, right? And so I think school districts are really thinking about how do we use AI in a way that serves our purposes in increasing educational outcomes for students. But at the same time, how do we minimize the legal risks, right? And the security risks that we are dealing with. And so I think AI is a very interesting thing. In my role, even at No Debt Degree as a founder, I love AI, and sometimes people look at me sideways when I say that, but I think for founders that sometimes have time poverty, that's what I call it, we're working and supporting so many students, having AI to support a student who is looking for scholarships, is thinking about how to pay back their student loans. Immediately, we can put some inputs into AI, immediately create a roadmap. Oh, these are the schools that might best fit where you're trying to go. These are the scholarships you apply for. And then also with the student loans, this is what Biden just passed. You need to know this, right? So I think in some ways, things that would take months or sometimes, months seems like a long time, actually like weeks or days to do, if I can get that down in 2 hours, that's more students served, right? So I think AI has as with everything, a good and a bad. In school districts, and I would say entrepreneurs who are working with students, or nonprofits that are working with students, are thinking about how to utilize this in a specific way.
If I could just add to what you said, because
I like it.
I couldn't agree more with that point. A couple data points. If you look at on the education side, if you go to Khan Academy and look at how they're using it, and there's early data already around this, that students, using AI tutors, right, personalized tutors, allow you to, now have someone, and this is where, you really start to create more of a equitable playing field. That you're getting the tutelage that otherwise you wouldn't be able to afford, you wouldn't have access to, and what they're seeing is that the bottom half of students, right, on test scores are moving up to the median.
Exactly.
Right, so what you're doing is you still have a bell curve, but the bell curve now is getting shifted all the way from up to where the bottom half is now at the median level. There was another consulting firm that did a study where they released it to all their analysts that came in. And what they found were two interesting insights. One, they gave it to analysts with training around how to use AI, and they gave it to analysts without training. No difference. Why is that important? Like, if we allow people to feel optimistic around experimentation for it, they don't really need a lot of training. We just need to give them the agency to go test and learn. The second, what they found is when they gave it to their top quartile consultants versus the bottom quartile consultants, or bottom half, the top quartile didn't actually perform that much better. Because they had their own way of operating. The bottom half all moved up into the median. Right? So now they're creating incredibly more efficiency with the same class of folks just using AI. And there's no training involved with it. So when you start thinking about the ripple effects there of then just providing access to different communities and encouraging them to try things, like that I think is the big opportunity, right? And we don't know what we don't know, but we also don't know what we don't know on the upside.
Right.
Like until people start experimenting with it, they won't know what, like, oh my God, now it can really change my life because I can do X. I couldn't have done X before because it was going to be either too cost prohibitive, take too long, or I didn't have the resources.
Dominique, you work with some of the oh, sorry, you have something to add. Go
Yeah,
for
I
it.
do. Just to add to that, and I kind of want to flip it back on you because I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think the fear is of AI or leveling the playing field?
I think it's both.
Okay.
We've seen far too many dystopian movies about AIs coming for you, so we actually have personified it. It's like if you have any adaptive technology whatsoever, a map, anything, any translation, you're already using AI. It's a part of our lives.
Yeah.
It's been for 25 years.
It's here.
But we've like made it like this beast that's going to come for us. It's just my opinion.
The boogeyman.
Some beast is coming for us, and it's going to destroy humanity as we know it and make us all jobless. So I think that's that dystopian fear that just humans have of everything. And then, fine, let's say it's not the beast, but it is an accelerator of wealth.
Right.
We're going to exacerbate the gaps that already exist. We know who's going to lose, okay? So I think that's two of the factors among many that are driving something. I'm sure you all have plenty. We'll get that in Q&A. But I want to come back to you because you've worked with some of these big names in AI and in the Valley. What examples are you seeing of some great use cases around AI for inclusivity in the workplace?
Great examples in the workplace. That's an interesting question, actually. I can't say that I haven't seen any, but I can't say that I would speak to any of those here.
Got it, yeah.
What I can say is what we've been working on at Dream Machine and building inclusivity for AI is we built out an AI Academy, and it's basically just a day-long version of workshops and teaching people of all ages how to use different platforms, and people learn differently, right? Like there's no one way to teach people things, and I think that building that event, we did that at the close of Atlanta Tech Week. It was amazing to see even the age range. We had anywhere from 3 years old to 7 years old. And we, real time, were able to ask people how they're feeling about it, what do they think about it, do they even know what it is, do you know what AI stands for? So I think that when you start things at that base level, like that's including people, instead of going into conversations where you think people already know what it is, when really you have to start like from the ground. It's not like, okay, you're starting from, that's like going from kindergarten to high school asking these questions, but where's all the terms and definitions in between that time? So I think that piece and teaching people like at that level, it makes everyone feel equal and then also comfortable in asking the questions that they don't feel comfortable with like normally.
So the focus is more on AI literacy.
Correct.
Yeah, so how do you use ChatGPT? How can it improve?
Yes.
Yes. Not coming to get you.
Exactly.
Arun, you teach at a university level, 2 different universities. What exactly are you saying to students and policymakers about AI as it relates to inclusivity and the future of all things?
Yeah, I mean, with students especially, I lead with the optimism side. Like, I wish I could be one of them right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the opportunities they have
So cool.
with what they can do is phenomenal. And really, I'm encouraging them, to be entrepreneurial in how they think about this, right? And what do I mean by that? You know, a lot of what we even write about in the book, in Venture Meets Mission, is around, you know, how do we take this generation and inspire them and use an entrepreneurial spirit, but use that to go solve big problems, right? Social problems, in a for-profit way. This isn't, you know, for not-for-profit. And that's what I'm encouraging them to do. And I think AI lowers accelerates the ability to do that and lowers the cost of being able to experiment with it to solve some of these big problems, right? And so now, you know, look, I think the things that we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years, you look at some of the experimentation in like bio right now, things that would have, you know, would cost, you know, tens of millions of dollars because of the number of PhDs you need, et cetera. Now, if you just know how to ask the right questions, you just need a team of like 5 or 6 people. And less than $1 million, and you can get going with it, right? And so I'm encouraging them to start picking these areas that are going to be more mission-driven, right? That will have more impact, and think about how they can create and leverage AI to build sustainable businesses for that, right? So, because I think we're on the verge where we can really create mission-driven capitalism here, and really bring this together. You know, I quip in my class, like, I don't want you guys going and wasting your entrepreneurial talent and energy on Candy Crush 3.0. Like, we've got bigger problems in this country, right?
Yeah.
And you can go solve those.
Yeah.
But you can also go solve those and do well in that process, right? And so I think this is a real opportunity. And I think the language we use with them is important to encourage them to try that. It doesn't mean the first thing's going to work or the second thing's going to work. But I think that entrepreneurial spirit, I think, is at the core of what makes America great, honestly. I mean, it's, you know, there's nothing like it anywhere else in the world, right? I think the 2 superpowers we have here are our ability to create talent, as you've heard in our educational system, and our ability to innovate in our entrepreneurial ecosystem. We haven't just built the infrastructure to connect that towards government and mission-oriented problems. And I think that's the opportunity we now have, and that's what I'm trying to talk to the students about, right? Like, this is a 20-year journey. Like, go start experimenting in this sandbox now, and great things will come over time.
Great. So Queenstar, I have a scenario for you.
Yeah.
You're willing to go there with me?
Let's
All right, let's do
do
it.
it.
So let's say you represent all of K-12, all 55 million students in America, right? And you have an opportunity to sit in a room with OpenAI, with Meta, with Google, all the leading AI, say, ladies and gentlemen, I need you all to do the following 3 things that will fundamentally improve education in America. It could be 2 things, could be 3 things, but they have the power to build something together. What would you ask them to build?
Whoa. Okay, let's do this. I think what I would say is they have to have the right voices at the table.
Okay.
It's not even about what you're building. It's about who you're building it for and whose voice you are, that is your North Star in what you're building. So I think teachers need to be at the table. I think community, parents need to be at the table, because education is a whole ecosystem, right? It's not just the student, it's the teacher, it's the parents, and it's the whole community. So I would say that they should definitely bring in the voices of the people who are going to be most impacted by what they're doing. I also think it's important to keep in mind that the data, where they're pulling data from, should be diverse, right? I think historically some data sets might have very biased information. And so how do we make sure that if you are in an educational setting where we have a majority of students now being from Black and brown communities in this country, how do we make sure that the data sets that you're pulling from to create this AI tool reflects the students that are going to be using it? Because there's nothing worse than in your education system and interacting with your learning in a way that doesn't reflect you. It creates a really warped sense of self. And so I think that's what I would say. It's have more community voices at the table. Make sure where you're pulling from is actually diverse. And I would just, the third thing I would say is almost like the education system takes a very long time. It's like a cruise ship, trying to like move a cruise ship. The education system is very slow. I think the 2020 was the first time that they felt like we've ever seen the education system move fast. So what I would tell them, the leaders of AI, is kind of be patient. So many people have opinions about what learning should be, what education should be in this country. So as much as you're building these tools, know that the systems that are going to be utilizing these tools require a lot of checks and balances and multiple voices. So be patient with education as it catches up to the new and fast-paced developments that AI is creating.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If
We
I
have-
could add to
Go for it.
one
Yes.
thing,
Yeah.
to that as well, all of that I completely agree with, but I also put pressure on them to force access
Oh yeah, for sure.
across the
Yeah.
Like I actually think not only, not just leaving it to government or states, but I think these big AI providers and platforms almost have a responsibility to be able to contribute in, the same way you would say we need to have broadband everywhere. We should be, putting pressure on them to be able to provide access early on, so that this experimentation we're talking about can start beginning immediately.
Yeah, and I also feel like putting all the pressure on the big AI companies, I guess if they can't figure it out, then maybe they need to partner with the smaller ones that do, and give them more of a light, because there are people that are working on it, but I fear that because they're not big enough, they don't have that big name, that people aren't going to be reaching out to them. So I would put it on OpenAI or whoever else, like to partner with them. I know they know how to partner with people. They know how to partner with Apple. They know how to partner with all kinds of different companies. So I feel like instead of them kind of taking control over that, because we're not sure if they even know how to do that piece, then they should partner with the people that are doing that.
Fantastic. Yes, Emmy.
Thank you so much. I think this is one of the most important panels, and it would have been great to see Brian Chesky and Sam Altman sitting here and you all on the main stage. I'm just going to call that out because I actually think this is the conversation we're having about AI right now. I used to work for one of the big tech companies. I watched the whole race kick off and start to happen. And I'd like to talk about money and inclusivity on the money of AI.
Yeah.
Because while I think it is wonderful to be optimistic, I would prefer pragmatism,
Yeah.
which is that beautiful blend between acknowledging where you are and acknowledging where you want to go. So my question is, how do we get greater inclusivity in the money as companies, startups that start to use these tools from the bigger companies have to pay them back increasingly larger amounts of money for access to those tools? The bills are going to get extraordinarily huge, just like cloud compute. How do we make sure they have access to the money that stands to be produced from the development of this technology?
Who wants to take that?
I think that's a great fundraising question for VC.
Well, no, look, again, this is why I think access is important, right? Like, I think it's incredibly important out of the gates for these larger platforms to be providing access to entrepreneurs in different communities that are having trouble, would otherwise have trouble getting access to the technology, right? They can do that, right? We saw this in the cloud computing side. You can open up, and give out free credits and allow different communities and small businesses to start experimenting there right away. There's no reason that can't happen immediately. And that's where I was saying that I think before you even get to use cases, we need to get it to access around these kinds of things. As far as capital goes, I think once you have access, the capital will follow that, right? Because at the end of the day, part of the reason capital is going to a certain segment of the population is they're the ones that have access to the new technology. And so they're the ones then that are coming up with experimenting and coming up with cool ideas and use cases, which then go like, oh, that's something that could be a real big business, right? And so the way you create a more equitable playing field is early on, have everyone have a broader group of folks have access to it. And that those ideas then can come up with from a much more diverse set of individuals. And I think that's what we talk a bit about in the book as well in Venture Meets Mission, which is why, because those use cases are very local, right? The use cases that, in our underrepresented communities of how AI can change things in a for-profit way, only they know, right? But they don't know until they get to experiment with it. And so that to me is the gating item right now, right? Like, how do we force some of the leaders and names that you talked about to really push it into these communities in a meaningful way early on? Like that, you can't wait 3 years or 5 years because the gap's just going to exponentially widen.
Great. Thank you. We have a question up front. Mike is coming.
Good morning. I work with K-12 in underserved schools, and we've developed AI programs for phonics and vocabulary, reading comprehension, and writing. We have been in an era up until a couple years ago where there was no phonics. It was balanced literacy. You could be coming from El Salvador or the Dominican Republic in 6th grade and go to 6th grade. And they would tell you, well, just try and figure out the words, what it means. So my question is, there are the science of reading, which is the method that they all want now, is out there. And why start the whole wheel where there could be partnerships of programs that are already working?
So what's the question? I just want to make sure.
How do we partner? Because I don't think we have to start from scratch on this, especially for education. So it's more awareness of what's out there and how to partner rather than totally recreate.
Yeah, as of, I think last year, there have been over 20 states that have passed science of reading laws. And I think we are in the early stages of figuring out the implementation of science of reading. So for the partnerships questions, I think it's going to be state by state, how they work to increase literacy in those respective communities. And so I would actually tell you to check out our website, whiteboardadvisors.com. We do a lot of state tracking on science of reading laws and really thinking about how each state is implementing that work on the local level. Can you repeat it? Whiteboard.
Whiteboard Advisors.
So whiteboardadvisors.com. Yeah.
And Hooked on Phonics worked for me.
Yeah.
Just so you know. I'm a child from the 80s. Yes.
Whiteboardadvisors.com.
Sir.
I'm an engineer. I want to know, in your vision of the future and the regulatory environment in which AI is going to be regulated, what are the current government agencies that would likely do that? And is there a need for a new one?
What do you think, Arun?
So I think it's hard to have a new one, again, to use Emmy's phrase, to be pragmatic, because you're just not going to create a new agency. Where do I think it happens, though, right now is the AI Safety Institute, which is inside of Commerce and NIST. If you look at the work that Elizabeth Kelly and Elham Tabasi are doing there, it's really, around exactly this issue. Like, how do we start thinking about safety guardrails? How do we do the testing, standards? That's why NIST, I think, is probably the right spot for a lot of this regulatory work to come in. And you've got really amazing talent there in how they're thinking about it. And I think that's where this will ultimately continue to be. Having said that, I think every agency is going to have, probably a chief AI officer, right? Inside, just like we have a chief data officer, you're going to need a chief AI officer inside these organizations. That the AI executive order alludes to that. Hiring those folks is hard, and again, that's where I think there's an opportunity right now. And we're trying to help with this with Noble Reach. We're like, how do we help get our best tech talent coming in, both at the junior levels, but mid-career folks, second career folks, people that have had great careers come in, and I think we need to change the language of how we do that, right? Like, this isn't about like needing to come into government and being there for your career. Like, I say government sells careers, but students are buying experiences, right? If you can break it down to a 2 to 5 year experience that's mission oriented. The line's out the door if students want to do that. We're seeing that with our own program. We were 12x oversubscribed on scholars signing up. We had 1,200 applicants for interns in the first 48 hours. We only had 10 spots. We had to shut it down. So students are thriving to want to do this. And so I think if we can get more of them in, it's not a demand issue. It's actually a placement issue on the government side and how we can facilitate that. So I think that's both where it ends up, but it does need to be across these agencies. It's not going to be one agency by itself. I think every agency is going to have a level of responsibility because the use cases are going to be very different, right? AI in healthcare at HHS is very different than AI at Treasury, AI at DOD or VA. There's going to be a very different lens that needs to be brought to the table.
Did you want to get on that?
When you talked about the pipeline, it immediately made me think of this organization called Sure Start, and they're really thinking about how do we get more students of color into AI careers. And it's actually created by a woman of color who was an AI scientist and realized there are not a lot of people that look like me who are in these AI careers, and is now going into some of the most underserved communities and training students on how to have inroads into AI careers. So I think we have to talk about the pipeline. I think in some ways that conversation is lost, but the pipeline into these careers, and one thing I will be remiss as a liberal arts major, I must say, you mentioned being an engineer. We have to have more than engineers in the room when creating AI. This is it's human beings that are creating this technology. And if you only have one lens in which this technology is being created, it's automatic that it's going to have some kind of bias. So the liberal artist in me will say that we need interdisciplinary approaches to creating AI. So you need to have the psychologists, the anthropologists, all of them have to be at the table, because these conversations that we are now having about biases are because the humans creating this are not coming from diverse backgrounds. And so I would say definitely pipeline, but definitely have different people at the table. And then those and the frameworks that you're talking about, I think also come in that conversation as well.
Great, we have a question from the gentleman in the black shirt.
Hi, I'm a post-secondary education teacher, and I adopt AI into my practices heavily. And I see the value not only in inclusivity for educational opportunities, but also in educating future populations to use this very, very powerful tool. And if we started a K through 12 level of educating them how to use it, but my problem is my colleagues are afraid of AI on so many levels. They're afraid of their job security. They're afraid of cheating. And I'm going to tell you, I just wrote a master's degree, and any of you who have ever had to do like academic research on JSTOR or any of these other academic, ChatGPT 4.0, I say, give me some academic resources to go look up using these things as a tool, and I try to explain that to my colleagues. So my question to you is, how do you get these entrenched educational people, not just the administrators and the superintendents, but it's got to be on a ground level with people like me. How do you convince us that have been so entrenched that you got to go in the microfiche, you've got to go look in the catalog? How do you get us to start to adopt this policy that is the most valuable tool I've ever seen in education?
That's a great question. Honestly, I am of the mind that AI has given us time back. I truly believe that. And I think in some ways, I'm a nerd, so I will say this, like AI actually makes me more curious to learn more, because the information is coming so quickly. So I get a readout, and then I'm able to say, okay, what's the next thing I need to know? So I think for educators have almost a sense of responsibility over their research. It's so ingrained with who they are as people in their research. But I think the students are the users in higher education. They are the clients. And if they are using AI, eventually there is going to be a tension where professors are going to be upset with students, but students are going to be using this regardless. So I think in some ways, it's a waiting game, and I think students and AI are going to win. And it's either you get on the train now, or you're just going to get left at the station. So I think it's a little bit of hardball. What did you say? Well, I think you guys are making a choice to wait that long by not embracing it quicker. And so,
last question, yes.
Thank you, and thank you for all the comments that all of you have made. I also work in early childhood education, and I can honestly say the public schools around the country are in big trouble. They don't have enough money, don't have enough teachers. Teachers don't know how to train, how to teach certain subjects like reading. There's tremendous bureaucracy, and there's no communication between school districts and state's Board of Education. Sounds like a problem AI can solve. But the question is, what can you do as someone who works in the field to let people know that these problems really exist and there is a solution today? We don't have to wait 5 years for somebody to develop things, but they have to be very open. And State's Board of Education, when you see the documents that they produce, are like 20 years ago that are totally irrelevant to what's going on. How do you get this information that you're all saying and totally agree with? How do you get that information to the people who make decisions in schools?
Right. Who's going to take the last word? Yes.
I can take it. As someone who works in digital media space, and I think adults don't realize where the populations are. And I think it's going to come to maybe investing in public awareness campaigns around AI. I think school districts in some ways use communications the old school way, press releases. I think we need social media, like investments in social media and public awareness campaigns about how AI can move things forward. And I think that, of course, talking about the possible pitfalls of AI, but also educating them on how it's going to turbocharge the learning experiences of students and hopefully bring down some of the bureaucratic processes that we're seeing across our education ecosystem. But I think it's all about comms, and it's all about meeting people where they are, and where are people on social media. And we have to invest in that.
I was just about to say, I think so much of this is about storytelling.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's about finding the folks that are willing to take the risk and try it out. And then when you see those success stories, blasting it out there and making it highly visible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't even think there's like an either or strategy. I think it's everything. Do everything, get the message out everywhere. Because different people are going to be looking at different platforms for different things. So.
Well, let us all tell a better story about AI and inclusivity. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank this amazing panel.
Thank you, Cordell.